Hey, what's up, Seekers? Welcome back. We're gonna do something a little silly today, which is a reaction video to my own video. There was a lot that went into the video that I wanted to bring light to, a lot that I skipped out on, that I wanted to call your attention to, and I thought this might be a fun way to get to some of that material by watching the video here together and commenting on it along as we go. I hope you enjoy this as much as I do. Let us watch. Have you ever wondered what a Jewish day actually looks like from the inside? I filmed a full day of Jewish rituals from the moment we wake up till the moment we fall asleep with a short explanation of each. I hope you enjoy. I guess this is going to be like something of an intimate look into the filmmaking process and an explanation of the parts of the ritual that I didn't get to fully cover in the short 17-minute video. The first ritual, which we get to, is a thought. The day begins with a thought, speech, then action, and it ends with an action, speech, then thought, something which I didn't point out in the video itself. So we're going to begin with that thought, and that thought is shiviti, placing ourselves in the presence of God, in the presence of divinity. Just in terms of, I'm going to be referring to a lot of things that didn't make it into the final video. I wrote 30 pages of voiceover for this. That's 12,694 words, and the final voiceover script, the one that you'll hear here, which went through 3 periods of revising and cutting over the course of a few weeks, I cut it down to 7 pages, which was 2,822 words. So you will get a sense of just how much was cut out from those numbers, and maybe during this rambling video I will try and fill in some of the parts which I cut out. So let us watch. As I awaken and consciousness returns to me, I find myself in the presence of God, life of all worlds, pulsating through my veins. So that little rooster, I wish I could say that it happened in reality. It's added in post. Shiviti Hashem l'negdi tamid from Psalm 16:8, which becomes really a core principle of Jewish mysticism that we place. And we can translate this in a few different ways, and every one of these translations are, I hope, somewhat evocative and poetic. To place God before us can mean that if there's a choice between God and us, God comes first, and God here in the context of mysticism means the collective reality as a whole, perhaps. So we set the whole above the particular, we set the all before the singular. Shivisi also in Hebrew comes from the word l'shavot, which is to compare or to equate, that we equate everything that comes into our field of perception and conception with God. So we say, this is God, this is God, this is God. That is also a meaning of shivisi, part of this meditation that we begin the day with. I find myself in the presence of God, life of all worlds, pulsating through my veins. God in the Jewish tradition is referred to as Chei Ha'ilamim, the life of all worlds. So that is a direct translation there. I aim to carry this presence with me throughout the day, to experience the divine intimately in all things, to experience every moment and occurrence in my day as unique expressions of infinite divinity. It felt somewhat silly, like filming myself waking up, but I was trying to do the full day, so it's obviously a reenactment of waking up. I didn't have the camera rolling all night. And then catching me wake up, I made the bed, got back into it, woke up. And here on the bottom of the screen, I put a little marker of what moment of ritual is being enacted on screen. And this is the shiviti, this placing ourselves in the presence of God. To experience the divine intimately in all things. Here I have the shiviti kind of faded away on the screen itself, as in it's present there throughout the day, and we'll see it pop back up later in the day during the woodworking scene, where we have again God's name kind of there in the background and fading again into the background. To experience every moment and occurrence in my day as unique expressions of infinite divinity. Yeah, this is a really beautiful ritual, the chance to sit down in the morning and to really just absorb the presence of the reality that is at all times all around us. To feel into that is a really beautiful way to start the day. Some people said that this day is not so realistic. It's here, a solitary single person the luxury of being able to sit and meditate in the morning is certainly a luxury. And for those that have to jump out of bed because there are kids that need attention, that is also a form of meditation, as much as this is a meditation, I would say. In gratitude for the gift of another day, to live, love, and serve, I sit up in my bed with my hands together, slightly lower my head, and utter these first words each morning. So here we transition from the first thought of the day to the first speech of the day. The first thought being shiviti, the first speech being modesty, a declaration of gratitude, essentially, one which is incredibly profound, and we could make an hour-long video, if not more, just on this short sentence of modesty. But the attempt with this video was to not spend an hour on each ritual, but just a half a minute, if that, and just give a taste. Something which I was debating including here in the editing process is something specifically here in the language of modesty, which I think is fascinating. I'm going to play it for you now and make note of it. Moda ani lefonecha, melech chai v'kayam, shechazarta binishmasi bechemla, rabba emunasecha. Now in English, thank you, living and eternal majesty, for graciously returning my soul to me. Great is your faithfulness. So a few things to point out here. Rabba emunasecha, great is your faithfulness. That's a beautiful line. Great is the faithfulness of God, that God entrusts us with our life for another day. And there's a sense of empowerment in that, which is very beautiful. There's something of a challenge over here, which is that we right away begin to refer to God in terms of kingship, dominion, majesty, the king of the world, which sometimes can feel a little othering and dualistic. And maybe I'm not going to try and answer every challenge here, but just to give some voice to that. But lastly, and something which was very much almost about to make it into the final cut, which didn't, was the very beginning of the language here, which is Modeh ani lefanecha. I give thanks before you, God. But we don't say God's name at all. And there are many, many names for God, 7 classically in the Bible and elsewhere. But over here, it's just I before you. And the idea is that the state of the relationship between the essence of the individual and the essence of God is so pure that it transcends any labels and names, and it transcends the capacity for contamination, which is why the first action of the day, which is washing the hands, which we usually don't recite anything of sanctity till after washing our hands. We can recite the Modesty before, precisely because there is no name of God, precisely because the relationship between the self, small s, and the self, capital S, is an essential intrinsic relationship which cannot be made impure by anything that happened the night before. And it's a very powerful reminder of the inherent purity and connection that we have with our true selves, which can never be severed or sullied or disturbed, although we may feel that way in life. That's certainly a very beautiful meditation that goes along with this speech of modesty. Thank you for returning my weary soul, refreshed and rejuvenated for another day of service. I won't talk necessarily so much about here the filming that I did. I'm really amateur, but trying to have wide angle shots that you can get the setting, establishing shots as they're known, and then medium shots, and then sort of close-ups. Here we have a POV, so you're seeing the ball from my direction. I really am an amateur, and I was just kind of playing and having fun with the filmmaking side of this, so it might not be worth commenting. I'll leave the filmography, videography aspects from people that are more proficient at that to comment on. Before even putting our feet on the ground, we wash our hands. We gather water. So here I took the liberty to translate each one of the rituals in a creative translation. So instead of Netilat as the washing of hands, I translated here as intentionality, and I explain what the ritual here is. We gather water, symbolizing thought, still and contained, and pour it over our hands, the tools with which we engage with the world, anointing our actions with intentionality. So it's a very beautiful idea that water itself is symbolic of an idea. Ideas nourish, they flow from a higher place to a lower place, as does water. They bring life, as does water. And the notion here is that we take an idea, the idea of the idea itself, and we pour it over our hands, which are the idea of action, and we unite idea and action. It's quite a meta ritual in some sense. Also, each one of these interpretations are just one of many interpretations of ritual. And in essence, ritual as an embodied practice has a component of infinity in that it can be interpreted in an infinite multitude of ways. And here I'm just kind of providing one specific interpretation on each of these rituals. But I think the invitation of ritual is to move into the action and to feel its own rhythm, and then to discover what it means for oneself in the context of one's own individuality and one's own tradition, both in Judaism and any other tradition that has ritual. An emblematic ritual for the rest of our daily practice to follow, uniting mind and hand, intention and action into one cohesive, coherent whole. Yeah, so a lot of this theme of becoming whole again, that we go through our lives in stages in ways of fragmentation, and through presence and slowing down and intentionality, we can reintegrate our fractured selves. And a big part of that fracture from the perspective of Jewish mysticism is between our thought, speech, and action. Machshava, dibur, and maaseh. So a lot of the rituals are geared towards integrating those, what they're seen as like a horizontal integration. There's also a vertical integration between the masculine and feminine, which I don't know if I delved on as much here, but that's certainly present as well. There's a really cool sound. I don't know if you noticed this when the bowl dropped back in. Let's see if we can hear this together. For the rest of our daily practice to follow, uniting mind and right there at 142. Uniting mind and 140 hand, actually. Intention and anyways. Action, mind and hand, intention and action into one cohesive, coherent whole. This is stock footage. If you could look closely, those aren't my hands. Some of the things I didn't think of filming, and then I went back and I wanted to give some more show and tell in a way that was tasteful to the activity. So this is some stock footage I found online. After using the bathroom, we take a moment to reflect in awe in the presence of our own bodies and before the one who formed them. So here I'm filling up again a bowl for Asher Yatzar, for the blessing that we're about to make, which I'm translating here as a moment of wonder. Just a point here to make, which someone did mention in the comments, the bowls that I'm using here to wash are actually very beautiful handmade bowls by a friend of mine who's a very talented ceramicist. It's not typically what practicing Jews will use to wash their hands, but I found what was available and they were quite beautiful, and I'm glad that they were around. We wash our hands, raise them, and praise God, the miraculous healer of all flesh. I'm just noticing now, I think technically I should have washed my hands outside of the bathroom for this blessing, but the blessing I say outside because it contains God's name at the very least. I did that right. So this, by the way, I only showed this once, but every time we use the bathroom throughout the day, we wash our hands and make this same blessing. Also, a lot of people thought that this is like a lot of ritual to do in one day, and it's like they would spend their whole day doing it. When you do these things a lot, they become a routine, which in a way is bad because you don't pay attention to them. And making this video allowed me to return and pay attention to my own rituals, but also you do develop a sense of proficiency with them, and you can. It doesn't take all day, despite what this looks like. This is a very beautiful blessing here, and here I have it in Hebrew and English. I thought it would be important to include the Hebrew, although I know that most people don't read Hebrew, but I think it's a beautiful language and it's the words of the rituals. So I wanted to bring some of that authentic Hebrew on the screen as well. The miraculous healer of all flesh, for forming the human body with wisdom. Yeah, so here we have the Asher Yatzar. I didn't translate all of it. You can see there's like 3 dots here, which means that I skipped some of the translation, but you could find the translation in full. And it's a beautiful ritual, and I explain why. We brush our teeth, and I don't explain why. Here I wrote that an act so easily taken for granted, like using the bathroom through this ritual, is transformed into a moment of awe in the presence of our own bodies and before the one who formed them. Maybe I did say that, I can't remember now. Here you see me brushing. Bodily hygiene and health is a religious obligation in Judaism. It's from Deuteronomy 4:15, "Ushmartem ha'ed l'nafshosechem," you should take good care of yourself. There's also the notion that we use our mouth as the vehicle of prayer, and therefore it must be clean, which I mention here as well. Keep our bodies clean, for it is the instrument with which we serve God. Here I'm showering. The order of this might have got mixed up a little. Most people, if they're going to go to mikvah, which the ritual we'll see later, will shower after mikvah. just to rinse off their bodies. But so this may be a little out of order. There's no aspect of the Jewish day which isn't guided by the path of life known as halakha. So this is important, this point about halakha. And halakha is really the blueprint of the daily ritual we do. Halakha both describes and prescribes the rituals, it records the way that Jews have practiced and instructs us of how to practice. Here I spoke about halakha for 15 seconds. I do want to make a full episode on halakha and try to explain it from the perspective of Jewish mysticism. And that's some work that I'm doing now. A friend of mine actually sent me a pre-publication of a 400-page book that he's working on halakha. It's called Laws of the Spirit. When it's published, I can share it and plug it and hopefully have him on for an interview, because he's a fantastic scholar and beautiful human. The book is on ritual mysticism and the commandments in early Hasidism. Plus that, with some of my own research, I want to present a way of reconceptualizing halakha, Jewish ritual, Jewish law, as not as law actually, but as the way, which is the literal Hebrew translation of the word halakha, like halicha, walking in Hebrew, for example. The purpose of this path is to guide us in all things towards God. So a lot of the challenge with Judaism is that our religion has been translated in foreign terms. So when we translate something like halakha as Jewish law, we're using Roman and Christian constructs to translate an indigenous Jewish idea, which doesn't do it justice and frankly misrepresents what it is. So a lot of the work involved here is kind of translating Judaism's terms on its own terms. Halakha is a keen example of that, which really does not mean law, but means halicha, means the path of life. Halichos olam, the eternal paths which bring us into eternality. But we'll do an episode on that, so I'll hold myself back. Getting dressed is no exception. We dress modestly. We avoid exposing ourselves unnecessarily, even if there's no one else around to see us. There's something of an irony here, which is I'm talking about getting dressed modestly, even if there's no one else around to see us, which is a beautiful principle that's discussed in the Talmud and elsewhere, that the sages, even if their house was entirely empty, they wouldn't expose themselves to the beams of their house, for example, described very poetically. And yet here I am getting dressed in front of a camera, which is going to go online in a very, very public display. So there's an irony there, and I certainly tried editing the video so that it remains modest, but I'm not, the irony is not lost on me. Let me say it like that. And we wear clothing that won't call unnecessary attention to ourselves so that we can serve God quietly and humbly. This idea that I just mentioned here, the Hebrew word for that is tznius or tsanua, dressing with modesty. It's an idea which has unfortunately been hijacked a lot in certain Jewish circles and used as a very oppressive, I would say, tool to particularly young Jewish girls and women. When tznius being tsanua is so much deeper and more profound than just policing what someone else wears. I don't think we should ever tell someone else what they should wear, but the ability to dress in a way that's non-ostentatious, in a way that is demure, if that's the word, and quiet, in a way that allows us to move through the world in silence, to me is a very beautiful idea. And I wish that we could somehow repurpose or reappropriate the word tznius, which I think, modesty, which I think has been very heavily misused and abused, and used to abuse as well in very unhelpful ways. It's wishful thinking that a small video like this could go any way to help that. But I think instead of policing people about, the length of their skirt and whether their elbows and collarbones are being covered, which I think is frankly modern conceptions of tznius. If you ask what your grandmother wore in the shtetl, they were not covering their collarbones and elbows. Instead of policing people, if you could inspire people to want to live in ways that were humble and modest and reflect that in every aspect of their lives, including in how they dress, we could go from policing young women to encouraging them to embrace their own beauty on their own terms. Anyways, maybe this is an unnecessary rant and won't be relevant to most people, but there's certainly some tikkun, there's some healing to be done for this concept of modesty. We dress the right side of our bodies before our left, reminding us to give preference to kindness, which is symbolically located on the right, over severity, which is located on the left. Chesed, gvura. The one exception to this is our shoelaces, which we tie first left, then right, foreshadowing the tefillin, which we'll tie on the left as well. I know I said I wouldn't talk too much about the filming aspect of this, but if you notice, every one of these shots is a new shot, and I filmed this all myself. That means that I got up, moved the camera, took it down from the tripod. I filmed this over the course of 2-3 days. So went back, had a look at the footage, see what shots I liked, what shots I didn't like, redid them. So I put a lot of work into that, and I I think part of this exercise is maybe showing my work in some way. And we don't know that as consumers of media, but when we begin to produce media, we understand that every shot had to be set up and shot and lit and moved around and recorded and edited and cut. And hopefully you can feel the amount of the labor of love and the degree of that which I put into this. Besides for the overall modest dress code, there are 2 specifically Jewish daily items of clothing which we wear. This is stock footage again. I didn't have necessarily good footage of me and my yarmulke. Some shots also I didn't really know how to shoot them nicely, so I just found stock imagery to do it instead. There's a little anecdote here on the shoe tying thing, which I cut out, but here I have it. That a young chassid, a young Jewish mystic, was once asked why he traveled such great distances to study with the Maggid of Mezrich, the student of the Baal Shem Tov, the father of modern Hasidism. What is it that you learn from this master that you could not learn from your teachers? Is it Bible, Talmud? Is it the secrets of mysticism? And without invitation, the Chassid responded, I traveled to Mezrich to watch the great Maggid tie his shoelaces. There's something about that it's not the moments of piety or sanctity that are imbued with divinity, or they are, and that's not the chiddush, that's not the novelty, that's not the surprise. The surprise is that even ordinary moments like tying our shoelaces with intentionality, as we do here, alternating the order and whatnot, that moments like those become deified, which is a beautiful idea. The first is the kippah, a head covering which reminds us that the finite human brain isn't the ultimate arbiter of ethics or reality. So I wasn't sure how to translate kippah here, whether to translate as cover or cap. I went with cap because of the line that I'm about to say. But that we're literally capped and limited by infinite divinity, which transcends, yet also rests upon us, like the kippah. So there's the sense that the kippah reminds us, the yarmulke as it's also known, reminds us that there's something which is greater than us, that we're part of a larger whole, and we're not the be and end all of reality. Shocker. And that is, it's a cap, which caps us. It limits the ego's natural assumption that we are everything in an unhealthy, unintegrated way, because that's true, of course. But the cap also is something which is contained, and the divinity sits upon us, rests upon us, like the Shekhinah, which rests upon the individual, or inside the individual. The second item that we wear is the tzitzit, in fulfillment of the biblical instruction to attach fringes to the corner of our garments. So every time there was something here which was biblical, I tried to pop that up on screen. So you can see here Numbers 15:37-40, where we have this biblical instruction to attach tzitzit to the corners of our garments. Where are they? And here I explain why I paraphrase the Bible, explaining why. So that when we look down and see them, we're reminded of God's instructions to not stray after the temptations of the heart and the desires of the eyes, so that we may be holy unto the Lord. Amen. A consistent reminder to exercise our divine discretion, to elevate ourselves above our base instinctual drives and desires to a place of intentionality and holiness. Yeah, so we're transitioning here from the articles of clothing that we wear ritually to some of the items that we find in a Jewish home. Inside these small cylindrical cases that live on the doorposts of Jewish homes hides a secret little handwritten scroll, ink on parchment, containing the text of the Shema, the central declaration of faith in Judaism. Each time we pass by one of these boxes, a mezuzah, we reach out, touch them, and kiss our fingertips, giving us the opportunity to transition consciously and mindfully from one space to the other and from inside to outside. So the mezuzot are in a Jewish home put in every single doorway. Think about moving from one space to another, that there's like something quite profound that happens psychologically in that moment. And then when we leave a home, even more so. So the mezuzah is typically conceived of as a medium or amulet even of protection. The name of God that's often written on the front of the mezuzah is Shin Daled Yud, which spells one of the names of God, and also is an acronym for Shemer Daltot Yisrael, for God who protects the doors of Israel. But in a sense, also the mezuzah also protects us from moving mindlessly from one space to another. We can kind of rush in and out of rooms and in and out of homes, and the mezuzah allows us to pause and protect our presence, our thoughtfulness, our mindfulness as we move from one space to the next. Like 10,000 little signposts throughout the day, through every doorway we pass, gently guiding us back to what really matters and what we're really here for. Each morning, as our soul returns to our bodies, we become aware of the abundant miracles and blessings which surround our every step. The Jewish morning contains a beautiful set of centuries-old Hebrew blessings which give space to acknowledge each of these miracles. This blessing that's now on the screen, Elohai Neshama, O God, my soul, is seen by many as a counterpart to the previous blessing that we made, which was Asher Yatza, which is about the human body, and this is the human soul, sort of the two sides of that same continuum. To slow down and express gratitude for the bountiful blessings that we would otherwise inevitably take for granted. So here we didn't really have time to dwell on the blessings, but there's a full set of blessings. The blessing of Elohai Neshama, the one that we just had on screen, is really beautiful. We speak about the soul that God breathes into us. We speak about how it is pure, and it is God who creates her, forms her, breathes her into us. The sense that we sometimes can feel like we are tainted or broken or inadequate. And this prayer reminds us that no, the core of us, our soul, is divine, breathed into us by divinity. And then it's not really ours, that God takes it back from us and returns it to us kind of at will. And that kol zman shaneshama b'kirbi, that so long as the soul is still inside of me, I'll take the opportunity to utter praise to you. Just an exquisite blessing. There's a whole segment of blessings here that really any well-structured daily ritual has, making space to acknowledge each of the miracles that we experience, to slow down and to hold gratitude for those bountiful blessings that accompany us in every moment of our day. There's a set of them in Judaism which give thanks for our discernment, for sight, for movement, for posture, for clothing, for our strength, for firm footing, for purposeful direction, for the clothing that we wear, for the shoes upon our feet, for might and majesty, for the divine image which we carry, and for wakeful eyes. And I think that part of acknowledging these blessings, the way that they're articulated in the Hebrew, is to tie them into the frailty of the human experience. So, for example, when we thank God for vision, we say, "Blessed are you, God, who opens the eyes of the blind." And in some sense, there's something true about this, in that while we're sleeping, we're blind. And when we wake up, we can see again. So we ourselves experience blindness and come to vision. And in the other sense, there are people who are blind or are in captivity or who are hunched over or who are naked, as the blessings go on to describe. And I think in some sense, by connecting our own gratitude to those moments of human frailty, we take responsibility in some sense to be the divine presence in this world for those that don't have these blessings manifest in their lives. But by participating with them and by being divine and providing for them, we can extend those blessings to them in some sense, in a very beautiful way. I wrote that much more concisely here, that in each of these blessings, we connect our own human frailty, vulnerability, and soul reliance upon God's mercy with the rest of suffering humanity with which we identify ourselves. We come with humility before God to help us in our most vulnerable moments. And in the same utterance, we recognize the responsibility we have insofar as we are able-bodied and able-minded humans to be God's hands and feet, eyes and ears, to help others in their vulnerability. A lot of this didn't make it into the final cut, unfortunately. There's a whole segment here that was cut out about the set of blessings we make over the Torah. And I take a few paragraphs here to try to describe what Torah is and why we say a blessing over it. I feel like this is a piece which might be appropriate to release alone. Maybe I'll make like a Substack or something, or put it in the Discord, because I think it's quite beautifully expressed here, if I may say so myself. I also skipped here the priestly blessing, the Birchat Kohanim, and I think this is where the video catches up with the script. We next begin to prepare ourselves for prayer. Before encountering God in prayer, we abstain from eating a meal and from avoidable social interactions. So there's a whole section here that I cut out, which is related to what we were saying before, that in Hebrew, the word for prayer that we're translating is tefillah. And while in English, the English word prayer comes from precare in Latin, so entreat, implore, beseech the deity. In Hebrew, tefillah has a complex etymology, but at least one that I was going to present here is this notion of tefillat keli, to pitch and to put back together, in some sense, a shattered vessel piece by piece. It's a complex etymology, and there are some other ones that contest with it. But the notion that we're not coming to ask something of God, we're not coming to beg from God, we're coming to reunite ourselves with divinity in the act of prayer, is the sense that tefillah carries that prayer does not. There's also the word that used for prayer in my own community is actually the Yiddish daven or davenen, which also has a contested etymology, but it may come from the High German donen, which I found here in my research, which means to sing, which is the way that Hasidic prayer is done, with a melody, which is beautiful. So here I skip to the actual preparations and the things that we avoid before praying. Before encountering God in prayer, we abstain from eating a meal and from avoidable social interactions. All our emails and notifications from the night before can wait until after we've centered and grounded ourselves before God. Did you hear the little notifications sounds that I put in the background there? In addition to preparing our minds, we also prepare our bodies for prayer. At the very least, by rinsing out our mouths and washing our hands. So here we have the infamous mikvah scene, but some have the practice of immersing their entire bodies in a body of water. So this is the very PG version. Obviously there was more footage here, and I had sent the draft over to some friends to review, and they got to see some more skin, and they kindly suggested that I make it more modest. So thank you. You know who you are. And my apologies for, well, nothing to apologize for, actually. I'm wondering if there's anyone I should thank by name. I think there is. I think I would like to thank Esty by name for her diligent viewership of the draft and editorial insight. Thank you, Esty. And while I'm thanking people, I can thank Alicia Pearl, who looked over the script and gave me some great suggestions. Known in Hebrew as a mikvah. This practice of daily immersion, mikvah is a really exquisite ritual, very central to Judaism in some very significant ways. This practice of daily immersion is a ritual rebirthing in which we watch the body of yesterday, weighed down by all the limiting beliefs and habits from the day prior, slip beneath the surface of the purifying waters and sink peacefully to the bottom, allowing a fresh body to emerge newborn into the fresh light of day. So I don't mention this, but the mikveh plays a very central role beyond just preparing us for prayer. The final act of conversion when one converts to Judaism is immersing oneself in mikveh, from which they are reborn as a Jew. The Jewish people collectively mikveh at the moment of revelation at Sinai, where they as a whole convert to the faith from a family. Women, after completing their lunar cycle, immerse themselves in a mikvah, and from which they emerge reborn with new life inside of them. Men, in certain communities, immerse themselves in mikvah on a daily following the solar cycle. No Jewish community is complete without a mikvah. The mikvah, in terms of communal funds and resources, is purchased before even a synagogue or a Torah scroll is purchased. And when we finally pass away, our bodies, in the process of attire, our purification, in an act of pouring the water mikvah upon us, is also mikvah in that way. So it's really, really central to Judaism and a really beautiful ritual, which was brought back into the center of daily Jewish life by the Hasidic movement, of which I was born into. As well, the meditation which I shared from mikvah here is just one of many, but one which resonates with me and hopefully with you as well. This next scene, I did not film either on location, and I filmed it when I was later in Massachusetts. This is tzedakah, as we will see. Before settling down to pray, we take a coin and put it aside as tzedakah, poorly translated as charity, better translated as righteousness or justice, for it would be unjust to sit down to attend to our own spiritual needs while the physical needs of another are left unattended. If anyone's curious how I got this shot, I put my camera beneath like a glass container, like one of those cooking, what's it called, like the glass cooking ware that people use, and then I took the lid of like a blender, which is what you're seeing here, and then I drop the coins through the blender lid onto the glass, and then the camera catches that. Look at me being creative. I didn't mention this, but there's sort of an intentionality, like with everything here, and a meditation that goes into the act of giving tzedakah, one which I wrote down here in the script originally, but then did not include for sake of brevity. There's a mystical understanding of the mitzvah, this ritual of tzedakah, of what's translated as charity, but as I'm saying here, better translated as righteousness or justice. And the justice is bringing something into the right, basically. And what that means is that we go about our everyday waking lives, our ordinary waking consciousness, with a sense of separation from others, from the world around us, from people around us, limited, isolated by our own mortal bodies. In the act of tzedakah, we shatter that illusion according to Jewish mysticism. We take I'm kind of half reading from the script that I wrote here. We take our hard-earned money, with which we could buy life-sustaining food for ourselves, and instead we choose to share that with another human, by which we demonstrate to the world and to ourselves that our sense of self and our life is not limited to our own self-concern, but is now expanded to those around us. In doing that, we demonstrate that the other is not truly other than us, that all is God, glimmering, this is what I wrote, that all is God glimmering through 8 billion manifestations, all one in God's unity. In the act of tzedakah, we become infinite and immortal, because in giving of our life to another, our self is no longer confined to the limited constraints of our mortal body. And in that act of unity, we make ourselves ready to pray. The notion that taking something which could really sustain us and sharing that sustenance with another human is to say we're not separate, we're one, which is why the Talmud says that tzedakah tatzil mimavet, that charity saves us from death. And the way that's read by the Jewish mystics is that it literally saves us from death, because death is only possible while we're stuck in a limited egoic conception of self. But when we expand that, we can't die because we're infinite. And we demonstrate that and effectuate that in the act of tzedakah, which is not charity, but it is rightness. It is the right state of reality made manifest in that act. Beautiful. The act of prayer requires a specific mindset. So this section of Hitzbana notes Contemplation. In Talmudic times, we describe the early pietists, the Hasidim Rishonim, as famously meditating an hour before prayer and an hour after prayer. And we may not have an hour before and after every prayer, but we can take a moment of time, and which can be as good as an hour. In some mystical communities, such as the one that I was raised on, there is an hour actually given before prayer to the study of Hasidic philosophy, to contemplation. This was instituted by Rabbi Shalom Doger Schneerson, the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, in 1897. And the pre-prayer morning study session, while incredibly challenging for a teenager who likes sleep, did also fill my young mind with what to contemplate and meditate on before praying, and I'm grateful for that until today. A classic meditation that the Hasidic world teaches us to contemplate on before prayer is how God both transcends all of reality and yet imbues all of reality with God's presence. How God is Sovev Kol Almin, surrounding all worlds, and Memali Kol Almin, filling all worlds. That's some classic Hasidic meditation for you. We begin by clearing our minds from all extraneous distractions so that we might focus entirely on the task at hand, namely, to be in the presence of God. Hareini mikabel alai mitzvat aseh shel ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. I hereby accept upon myself the commandment to love my neighbor as my very self, literally. Yeah, a very important part of prayer is this the commandment of ahavat reim. Mitzvahs aseh shel ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. And really a prerequisite for not just prayer, but for the entire day. If you'll see here in the background near my foot is good old Jasper, who was a fan favorite in the comment section. Jasper's a sweetie. Also a troublemaker. He's a cheeky fella. There's another prayer here, which I cut out. There are actually two. There's Matovu and Adanalam. Matovu is a prayer that we recite typically before entering the house of prayer. Matovu alecha Yaakov mishkanesecha Yisrael v'ani b'rev chazdecha ave v'secha ashtachava el hichal kachecha b'yarsecha v'ani tefilasi lecha adinei yisratzin elihim b'rev chazdecha aneni b'emes yashecha. How good are your tents, O Jacob, your encampments, O Israel, and I, in your abundant kindness, approach your house, that I may prostrate myself towards your sacred chamber in awe of you. V'ani tefilasi lecha. May my prayers be received by you, or may I become a prayer. May I be a prayer before you at an auspicious hour, and may you, God, in your abundant kindness, answer me with the truth of your salvation. Following that, there's another prayer which I skipped here in the video, which is very beautiful. One of my favorite prayers, Adon Olam. Should I say it? Adon Olam Hashem Malach B'Terem Kol Yitzir Nerva. Liis nasei b'cheftakol azay melech shmenikra v'acharei kichleis hakol levado yimlech neira v'hu haya v'hu hayveh v'hu yiyeh b'sifra v'hu echad v'ein sheni l'ham shalei l'hachbira bli reishis bli sachlis v'lei ha'ez v'ham yisra v'hu eli v'chai gali v'tzurchev li b'yesara v'hu nisi umanis li menaskesi b'yemekra b'yado yefkidurchi b'yesishan v'ayira v'imruchi v'yasi adoni li v'leira. Master of the universe, who ruled before anything was created, the moment you willed everything into being, then the king was called by name. And after every last thing ceases to be, you will continue to reign alone. You were, you are, and you will be for all eternity. You are one without second. None compares to you, none can join with you. Without beginning and without end, yours is the might and the dominion. You are my God, the life of my redemption, my rock and anchor in time of need. You are my flag and my refuge, my raised cup on the day that I call out. Into your hands I place my spirit. When I sleep and I arise, with all my soul and all my body, God is with me. I shall not fear. In the video, we skip here to putting on tefillin, but there's more. There's a section here on the Akedah, the segment from Genesis 22, which we read every day, God's instruction to Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. A reminder that sometimes a life of service calls for the greatest of sacrifices, comparable to Abraham's final challenge. And then we read a section of the Karbonot, recounting the sacrifices done in temple times, based on the logic that the Talmud puts forth, that since the destruction of the temple, it is prayer that replaces sacrifices. Our lips replace cattle, quoting the prophet Hosea. this recitation of the section of the sacrifices recalls the mystical reading of the sacrifices as an internal sacrifice, based on their reading of Leviticus chapter 1 verse 2, that Adam kiakar mikem karban Hashem, that when a person amongst you brings a sacrifice to God, and they read that literally, that the sacrifice is from amongst you, it's from inside of you, that is the source of the sacrifice, that we sacrifice our own inner beast in divine service to keep the flame burning on the altar. And then we skip to there's actually something before the tefillin here, which is the talit. And I wrote up a whole section here, which I skipped as well. Should I read it to you? Maybe I'll skip the whole section I wrote out, but I'll just read to you what we say before putting on the talit. We say, Berchi nafshi es Hashem. Hashem elikai gadalt mi'od hod v'hader levusha. Oter kasalma neter shamayim kiyiria. O my soul, bless God. My God, most exalted, your garments are glory and splendor. You wrap light around yourself like a garment and spread the heavens like a curtain. We then wrap ourselves in the talit, make a blessing over it, affirming God's will to sanctify us by instructing us to wear the talit. And we say, Ma yakar chazdecha elikim v'nei adam b'tzak nefecha yichson, yuridin midesh b'secha v'denachal adosecha tishte, ki imucha mekar chayim be'ercha nir v'shoy chazdecha lirecha v'titkascha liyeshrei lev. How precious is your kindness, O God, that you let mankind take shelter in the cover of your wings. May they soak up the abundance of your dwelling and drink from the rivers of your bliss. For you are the true source of life, and it is in your illumination that we see light. Draw your kindness upon those who know you, and your righteousness upon those of upright heart. Yeah, in my community, we do not wear the talit. That's why you don't see it here until we are married. And I'm not married. If you know anyone out there that would like to help me wear the talit, I would be very grateful. What you see me putting on here are tefillin. We tie tefillin upon the arm, facing the heart, and upon our head, corresponding to our mind, as a physical metaphor of tying together three things: our arms, namely our actions, our heart, our emotions, and our mind, representing our thoughts, to unite them as one in the service of God and our fellow human. Tefillin are a physical antidote to the internal separation we all experience on the daily between what we know we should do, what we want to do, and what we actually do. There's a lot of symbolism in the tefillin which I skipped here. For example, we spell God's name again, the same name of God that appears on the mezuzah, Shakai, Shaddai. We spell with the tefillin, different ways of counting how it's spelled, but a shin here, dalet here, yod here, different ways of shin also on the head tefillin, different ways of spelling God's name. We wrap the leather 7 times around the arm, as you can see here, which represents different things for different people. For the Kabbalists, it represents the 7 emotive sfirot: Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, Malchus. That's 7. Thank you. It also mirrors the 7 times that the bride circles the groom under the wedding canopy, the chuppah in Judaism, which corresponds to the fact that through wrapping our action with divinity, we are betrothing ourselves to God, which is why in some communities, not in my community, but in some communities, there is a verse said from the prophet Hosea chapter 2, when we wrap the tefillin upon the hand, v'yarstichli le'olam, v'yarstichli b'tzedek v'mishpat, b'chesed v'rachmim, v'yarstichli be'munah, v'yadas es Hashem, and I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you with righteousness, justice, kindness, and mercy. I will betroth you to me in faithfulness, and you shall know God. The head tefillin is seen as a crown with which we crown ourselves, resting it between our eyes, on our forehead, like a warrior king securing their wartime crown, heading into the battle of prayer, like the high priest fastening the golden headband upon their forehead. We run our fingers beneath the straps of the tefillin and tighten its knot snugly into the nape of our neck, into the crevice between our skull and spine. It's a very intimate ritual. Beautifully so. With the sharp black leather squares and thick leather straps of tefillin, we literally bind ourselves together. We tie ourselves whole again, bound before God, like a willing sacrifice. Like Isaac on the altar, we are ready to begin praying. The aim of prayer is to pour out our hearts before God, a sincere outpouring of feeling. That prayer is like that of a poor person, a destitute person, whose weakness enwraps them and overwhelms them, and they faint, and in that state they pour out their supplication before God, which is from Psalm 102, verse 1. That's the state of supplication that we aim to come to prayer with. Here we have on the screen the prayer which I read earlier. Matovo. A sincere outpouring of feeling, a labor of the heart, pouring itself into the heart of God, to a God who demands the heart. There's something of a paradox here between the sincerity and spontaneity that Judaism demands from its prayers. The sense that we come like a broken person before God, pouring out our heart. And yet, there's also structure, there's frameworks and set liturgies and calls and responses of Jewish prayer, and 3 times a day we pray. It's a real paradox between the outpouring of the soul and a scheduled time to pray. The hope is that those paradoxes are productive and fecund and give birth to new layers of meaning, new levels of spontaneity within the bounds of order, and new levels of order within the soarings of sincerity. This debate, by the way, is reflected in the codifiers of Jewish law, where there's a debate to what extent prayer is a biblical obligation. There is a biblical obligation in Exodus 23:25 to pray. The question is whether the thrice daily prayers fall under that obligation, or whether only in moments of real distress and need, and we turn to God in moments of spontaneous prayer, are we doing the biblical form of prayer. And I think that debate reflects this paradox that we're touching on here. To do this, we begin by quieting the mind. The heart of prayer is silence, and it's in that silence that we can hear the silent, still voice of God that joins us in harmony as we pray. I had written this whole section here about things that come up in that silence, like boredom, distraction, disturbances, and how to, perhaps some tips of how to deal with them in prayer. I wrote here that the key is to be gentle with them, not to fight them, to let them go and to stay sitting where you were, to return to our center, to our inner silence. There's a lot of actually discourse and discussion within the Hasidic discourse and literature about disturbances during prayer, how to face them, how to incorporate them, how to elevate them. It's a very elaborate subject in the literature, and I condensed that here into like one line. I didn't feel like I did a good job, so I left it out. Sit with them, let them go, and you stay. Return to your center, to your inner silence. This is a bit more just like practical mindfulness tips. Within the Hasidic world, there's more of a debate of to what extent do we engage with these extraneous thoughts, machshavot zarot as they're literally known. To what extent do we try to elevate the divine sparks within them? But I didn't touch on that here. A bit too complex for a short video. Or I lacked the subtlety to reduce its complexity down to a bite size. I can't blame it on YouTube. I have to take some responsibility as well. Here I pop on screen for a second the morning prayer shacharit, without explaining what it is, but it's a very fascinating incantation of sorts, or intention setting, where we say that the reason we're about to pray is for a purpose, for the sake of the union of Kucha Brichu, of the holy divine masculine with Shechina, with the holy divine feminine. The first 2 letters of the gods of the tetragrammaton with the second 2 letters of the tetragrammaton into a complete union in the name of all of Israel. In some Jewish communities that are more directly inspired by Kabbalah, such as the Sephardi world, This L'Shem Yichud, in different forms, is said before the performance of any Jewish ritual. In certain elements of the Hasidic community, like my own, we say it once before prayer and have in mind the rituals for the rest of the day. That every single act that we do is to unite Kutcher Baruch and Shechina. Did I write some explanation here about it? I did. Maybe I'll see what I wrote here. I didn't write much, but that we have the custom to recite this formulation and intention prior to the fulfillment of our religious practices, to remind ourselves for whom and what purpose we carry out these practices, to unite God above with God down here below us. We are Shechina, insofar as the Kabbalists are concerned. And the work of Kabbalah, of Jewish mysticism, and perhaps mysticism, largely speaking, at least in theistic traditions, is to stop othering God, the transcendent creator, from us, but to unite them, to unite Kutcher Baruch and Shechina, to unite God above and God down below, to unite us and God, to see that they're really one, that they spell the full name of God, Yod He and Vav He, together. The morning prayer, Shacharit, follows a structured routine, each segment of prayer building on the last, culminating at its center point and cascading back down to earth. Like the ladder in Jacob's dream, which begins on earth, touches celestial heights, and then returns back to earth again. Okay, so a lot of people that commented privately about the video appreciated this breakdown of prayer. It's not my own, it's not original. Little is. But there's a lot more going on here. There's also like the four worlds in Kabbalah, which correspond to the four stages here, and the fifth referring to the level above the four worlds. I think I might just make a full video to go through this schema of prayer as understood by Jewish mysticism. I even made like a whole chart here, which I ended up not including in the video. This journey of the morning prayer can be divided into 5 segments. We began in our bodies with the morning blessings, feeling the life of the world running through us as we bring our conscious gratitude to each of the body's beautiful needs and functions. That first bodily one here corresponds to the world of action, the world of Asiya, in which we inhibit. It also corresponds to the Yud of God's name. It also corresponds to the world of Domim, the world of matter, minerals, inanimate world, as it's referred to. And that encompasses the sections of prayer of Brachot, Karbanot, and Hodu. Next we sing a string of psalms, the songs of praise of the magnificent living world around us. Our emotions soar as we enter the rhythm, the song of nature, rising and falling, pulsating with the melodies of the psalms. You know what I might do? I might actually just put the graph that I was gonna put on the video at this point in this video, so you could see what I'm condensing here into very short lines. These songs of praise carry us to the Shema and its blessings, in which our mind is raised into heaven, joining the angels as they praise God, who continuously brings existence into being, sustaining and illuminating it in each moment. We gather at tzitzit, cover our eyes, and witness the eternal unity of God above and beyond all worlds, and we open our eyes to bless, to draw God down into our world, affirming that God above all worlds and God below, down here, are one. Okay, just to give you a sense, I had 6 pages here just on the morning prayer, going through the stages, going through the prayer bit by bit, trying to describe poetically and accessibly what's going on from the perspective of Jewish mysticism. I chopped that down to like half a page, but it's good material and I should probably just record it separately, so I think I'll do that. We arrive then at the pinnacle of prayer, the Amidah, the silent prayer in which we stand before the divine alone, in that intimate space where all else melts away and nothing but God exists. We enter into that moment of intimacy by taking 3 steps backwards out of our world, and then facing Jerusalem, take 3 steps forward, returning back into the direct presence of God, and we whisper, Adonai sefatai tiftach, ufi yagid tehillatcha. God, open my lips, and my mouth might utter your praise. I had the music drop off here, so that there's real silence for one moment in the video, in the moment of silence of Amidah. I wonder if anyone noticed that. There's also something here which I wrote, which is that the cycle of prayer that we go through can either be traversed alone or in a group setting. Certain parts of the prayer are only recited when prayed together in a group of 10. So a lot here is being skipped by extension of me praying alone. Following the Amidah, we begin our descent to earth. We touch down gently with some final prayers, poems, and psalms, re-empowered to reveal the unity and divinity within the goal of all existence. Following a brief morning Torah study session, we partake in some breakfast. So this is something which I kind of ran through in a half line, which is really not right. The place of Torah study in the Day of the Jew, which is really, really central. And I mean, if there's one thing that was underrepresented in this video, it was Torah study, unfortunately. But I'll try and do that justice in following up parts of this series. But particularly after prayer, the custom in many communities is to recite or study daily study portions, which are partitions of classical texts into daily portions. In the community that I was raised in, there is a cycle where we complete the 5 books of Moses over the course of a year, not just in a synagogue service on the Sabbath, but also in daily readings, reading one of the 7 aliyot, the 7 readings of the Torah for that week, each day, in addition to completing the book of Psalms every year and completing a study of the Tanya, which is the philosophical magnum opus, in some sense, of Shner Zalman of Liadi, the founder and spiritual leader of the Chabad Hasidic dynasty. And next we get into eating, into kosher. We partake in some breakfast. We make sure that whatever we're eating is kosher. By exercising restraint and selection over what we consume, we sanctify ourselves. Kosher, I translate here as mindful eating, which is a bit of a New Age translation. Kasher literally just means right or fitting. I think the only time the word kasher appears in the Hebrew Bible is in the book of Esther, where Esther says, "V'chasher hadavar be'einav," that if the matter is fitting in the eyes of the king. And it just means doing it the right way. So when we eat the right way, we're eating kosher. But in a contemporary context, I think it's fair to translate that as doing it mindfully, for the reasons that we elaborate here in the video. We separate ourselves from the animalistic consumption of anything that comes our way. The human is divine. There was a paragraph here which I skipped, which maybe is worth mentioning, that we make sure that whatever we eat is healthy for our bodies, as per Deuteronomy 4:15. We eat not to satisfy our appetite, but our hunger, as per Proverbs 13:25. We make sure not to waste food. That's a very big principle in Judaism, bal tashchis, and that the processes in which our food is produced are healthy and not wasteful for the earth upon which we live, as per Deuteronomy 20, verse 19. The human is divine precisely in that we can exercise choice and not merely be compelled by our base survival instincts. I'd written up this whole description of the 3 core principles of kosher, and then for the sake of brevity, again, I found instead this online infographic which covered a lot of what I wanted to convey in those three details in the form of the infographic. So I went with that instead, and I hope it covers what I wanted to say here. I think it does. It's quite comprehensive. We can aspire to more than just eating, excreting, working, sleeping, rinsing, and repeating. We can aspire to transcendence, to divinity. The ways of kosher, the halachot of kosher, remind us of this every time we eat. We do not just eat because we're hungry, we eat for a purpose. So there's 2 more segments here that I ended up cutting out. One of them is an explanation of the mysticism behind eating in Judaism. This notion of avodat habirurim, that is part of the cosmic act of creation. There was a moment of cataclysm in which there was a rupture of the divine realm, and sparks fall into the next iteration of reality as it goes, and that they find themselves in the earth and in dirt, which makes its way into plants and into the food that we eat. And when we eat according to the ways of kosher with the correct intentionality, we're able to take that energy, those nutrients, and use them for a sacred purpose, for acts of goodness and kindness, and thereby we elevate that spark back to its divine source. So I had a whole section explaining that. Us humans, by doing this, utilize the energy from the food for divine purpose, to give us the energy to be kind to one another, etc., etc. In doing so, we help complete the long journey of that particular spark, the Word of God, the divine energy, reuniting it with its source by allowing it to fulfill the purpose for which it was created. And then there was a second segment here about specifically about eating mindfully and ethically, and I enumerated 3 components. One is, and this is something that saying a bracha, the blessing before eating, allows us to realize, which I put on screen briefly here in the video, that when we eat, we realize that the food does not belong to us, but belongs to God, and that we must realize that there are others, humans and animals, who go hungry, and it's our responsibility before feeding ourselves to see what we can do to feed those in our vicinity. If, as per Jewish mysticism indicates, that we are truly one, then it only makes sense that we cannot sit to eat while other parts of ourselves, of God, go hungry. And then the other meditation, which the blessing over food invites us into, is to open us to the experience of eating itself, to feeling the divine energy entering our bodies, to feeling the life-sustaining nutrients entering our bloodstream and the flavors of divinity upon our tongue. There's this idea that the sweetness itself of the fruits and the food that we consume is the sweetness of God, a line attributed to the Maggid of Mezrich, the student of the Baal Shem Tov. So that's both 2 sides of a meditation that we can engage in while making a blessing, both the ethical between us and our fellow, and the ritual between us and the divine, which ultimately those 2 go hand in hand. Before putting anything in our mouths, we make a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam sha'akol yeh b'dvari. To call us into the full experience of the present moment, and to remind us that what we're about to eat or drink does not belong to us, but to God. After we've eaten to satiate our hunger, we give thanks to God for the food we've been given. Opening up a silent moment, not only for gratitude and presence, but also for digestion before getting back to our day. Okay, here we skip ahead to this notion of knowing God in all of one's ways. For those that wanted to know, this is not me in the footage here making some beautiful wooden furniture. It's stock imagery. There was a bunch of things that I wanted to, like, what do I say between breakfast and the afternoon and then evening prayers, like the entire day. So there was a bunch of things that I thought of including here, and maybe I'll just mention them. Notions of negative and positive speech that we refrain from throughout the day, from what's known as lashon hara, from negative speech, from gossip and slander. We make sure that we use our words to uplift, not to embarrass, to support and not to put down, to fortify, to give life to others, not to take away life, which is what negative speech can do. and to be aware of the power of our language, as per Proverbs 18:21 and elsewhere, Leviticus 19:16. We try to keep a kind word on our tongue ready for all that we meet, to have words of Torah and melody, purifying the air as we go about, and then also between good speech, in the absence of negative speech, there's an importance for silence. There's a beautiful line from the Mishnah that Kol yomai gadalti ben chacham v'lematasi tov laguf el ashteka, that all my days I grew up among the sages, and I found nothing so good for the body like silence. And then mentioned that there is actually a practice known as a ta'nit debore, a speech of a fast of words in which we abstain from speech, which is something which we can perhaps employ in today's busy, noisy world. I go overboard when I write, and I wanted to stuff a lot into this segment here. I wanted to throw in this segment here about there are 6 constant mitzvot, biblical commandments, that are obligated upon the Jew in every moment. And then once I was writing about those 6 mitzvot, I added a whole list of further foundational mitzvot. Maybe I'll pop it up here on screen or here on screen so you can see what I'm talking about. There's a whole further segment here about acts of kindness, tzedakah, throughout the day. Let me see if there's anything that I can briefly comment on here. Oh, just breaking down a variety of commandments that Jews are obligated to partake in regards to financial, spiritual, and physical tzedakah, righteousness. None of it which made it to the final video. I'll put it on screen here again, why not? And then there was a whole section here on the ethics of work itself, sort of the positive value that Judaism sees in the act of working, based on Genesis 2:15 and Job 5:7, and Mishnah Avot 4:1, also, which didn't make it to the final cut. What can you do? Throughout the day, there are countless opportunities to be of service to God and those created in God's image. You can hear the music shift here to something a bit more upbeat. That was Esti's idea. Thank you, Esti. There's a small verse which the bulk of Judaism, and particularly Jewish mysticism, rests upon, and that is to know God in all one's ways. To know in the biblical sense, which means with the greatest degree of intimacy. We strive to be intimate with God in all ways, in every thought, speech, and deed of our day, not only in sanctioned moments of sanctity, but in the depths of the ordinary, in the daily, the boring. There's the name of God that's present throughout the day that I mentioned of earlier, the Yud-He and Vav-He, the mundane and the uncommanded. Perhaps in those moments, the divinity that we encounter. There's something so beautiful about woodworking, by the way. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous craft. Is even more real and more deep than the divine which we are instructed to connect with. Yeah, so that's quite an important idea in Hasidic thought, particularly in Chabad Hasidic thought, that the divinity that's able to be manifested in this world through the commanded act of the Jewish ritual of the mitzvah, in some way does not go as deep as the mundane, uncommanded act, in which we nonetheless find divinity therein. And that's what I was hinting at there in that Hasidic reading of that verse from the book of Proverbs, to know God in all one's ways. And then we skip right to the 2 final prayers of the day, Mincha and Ma'ariv. One thing that Judaism has truly mastered over the past few thousand years is transitions. It's in those liminal moments when we're no longer in what was. By the way, I just realized this, that I translated here Mincha as pause, which is, no one's translating like that. But Mincha actually is might be connected to the Hebrew word Minucha, which does have a connotation of pause to it. Minucha means comfort and rest and pause in some sense. When we're no longer in what was, but not yet quite there in what's to come, where the magic happens. In those transitional twilight moments, Judaism calls us to stop and smell the roses. It calls us again into presence, intention, and worship. As the sun begins to dip in our day and twilight sets in, we pause whatever it is that we're doing and we stand for the second formal prayer of the day, the afternoon mincha prayer. You'll notice something here. I was just looking at the prayer book here, the Siddur, which is also stock imagery, and I was wondering whether it's actually mincha or it's something else entirely, because I know that when I had stock imagery for the morning blessings, it was not morning blessings at all. That was in the Siddur, which is a bit of a faux pas, if that's how you pronounce it. This is actually might be mincha, because it's the end of the Amidah here, which does appear in mincha. The mincha prayer holds, no one called me out for it in the comments, so I think we're all right, holds a very dear place in the collective Jewish heart. Oh, it's not mincha. You can see on the top of the page there, it says shacharit l'chol. It's the morning prayer for the weekday, but it is the same prayer actually. It demonstrates the same segment of prayer. That no matter what is going on in that moment, when the sun begins to dip, all else pauses, and we take a few moments in silence and prayer to express our love, gratitude, and reliance upon God in every moment. Once the stars appear in the night sky, we usher in the new day, which actually in Judaism begins in nightfall, with the beautiful Ma'ariv prayer, also known as Arvit. So here's a funny thing. Because in the book of Genesis, the first verses that recount the first days of creation say Vayi Erev, Vayi Boker, Yom Echad, and it was evening, it was morning, day one. The rabbis come to understand that the Jewish day begins with evening, not morning, which is why any Jewish day that we commemorate, we begin by nightfall. We don't begin by sunrise. So the Sabbath, for example, begins sunset Friday, doesn't begin sunrise Saturday morning. I actually toyed with the idea of beginning the day in the life with the night, because I think it would be both more accurate, considering that Judaism begins the day to begin at night, the night before, and because there's also something very profound about that in a psychological sense, that we don't really begin our day in the morning. The day begins by the intentions that we set the night before. That there's a saying in Yiddish that if you go to sleep like a horse, you wake up like a horse. And the inverse is, if you want to wake up like a human, you have to go to sleep like a human. And the intentions that we set the night before really set the day to follow. I didn't end up doing that because I think it would have been confusing for the audience, but I get to at least call myself out here now, and point out the value in the way that Judaism actually sees it. Even by the way, Judaism has its own conception of counting hours of the day. Judaism does not go with a standard 12-hour time based on the notion of hours that we have. It has something called shas manias, which takes the full length of the day and divides it equally, so that the hour of during the winter and the hour during the summer are actually shorter and longer. They're relative hours. Yeah, in some senses, I kind of compromised to the regular conceptions of time that we're used to now in the modern West. But it's good to know that that's not the case actually for Judaism, and one who lives a life of Jewish ritual knows that very intimately. After the Ma'ariv prayer, that's also stock image, by the way. That's not me. I didn't go into a time machine, get older, and come back. We set aside some final time for Torah study and then eat a light supper. So the idea of Torah study, again, is based on a verse in Joshua chapter 1, I believe. V'hikisa bam yom v'layla, and you shall dwell in them. You shall toil in Torah day and night. And because it's Yomam v'layla, that we try at the very least to study a bit in the morning, a bit in the evening, as a sort of minimal requirements, if you can call it that. So that's why I mentioned here Torah study again, before supper, or before dinner, as Americans call it. Keeping in mind all the prior blessings and intentions that we bring to the act of eating. And now we begin the night ritual, winding down to begin our day as it is. Part of the idea was to like film a full day overview, like a pilot version, and then to do like a morning segment, a prayer segment, a day segment, and a night segment. Maybe I'll still do that. I don't know. I looked back at the material and I'm like, oh, it's going to start feeling repetitive if I make 7 videos. I'm not sure. This is kind of a testing the waters to see whether there's interest in more of this. We begin our nightly ritual by taking stock of our day. We take an honest reckoning and accounting, to the best of our abilities, of all that transpired throughout the day, in the hopes that we can see where we might be able to improve tomorrow. So here, the ball that I'm filling is for the next morning's hand washing, which is like building this bridge from the night to the next morning, preparing it so that when we wake up, it's there ready for us, which I think is very powerful psychologically as well, that we're setting intentionality to wake up to. And what we're doing here as well, that's the act, followed by speech, which is the saying of the Shema, followed by the thought, which is what we think when we go to sleep, meditating on the purpose of sleep, or on the lives of the righteous, different ways of doing that. But that mirrors, as we said, the structure which we begin the day with, which is thought, shiviti, speech, modani, and action, which is washing the hands, and tat yadayim. So we have thought, speech, action, followed by action, which we're seeing now, then speech, then thought. And that's the chiastic structure. A friend of mine pointed out to me that it mirrors those 3 steps, literally in and out of the day, mirror the 3 steps that we take in and out of the prayer service. When we say the Amidah, the standing prayer, we take 3 steps back and 3 steps forward, which again mirrors kind of the chiastic structure of the day. Chiastic is just a fancy word for something that like climbs in and climbs down. If we take that logic further, it mirrors the 3 prayers of the day, which is Shacharit, Mincha, Ma'ariv. So those are sort of step in, top and then bottom, putting Mincha and the center of Mincha at the pinnacle of the day, which is very appropriate. Mincha is actually, I didn't say this while Mincha was happening, but now I'm reminded that I was going to say this. Mincha is like a really, really key prayer, a very beloved prayer in Judaism. Famously, Elijah the prophet is only answered in his Mincha prayer. The notion that we can stop in the middle of our busiest moment in the center of our day and say, no, we're going to make time now for God. There's something very precious about that halfway point. And over here, we can really see how it's the full chiastic structure, the real center point, which our entire day pivots around. There's also something really beautiful just about like creating chiastic waterfall structures in our daily lives. That's like the beauty of ritual to really structure and ritualize and romanticize daily life in a beautiful way is really quite exquisite. And also in a very humble way. There's something ostentatious here in filming this and sharing it, and I hope it was done with a sense of service and humility, and I think that's how it was received. But most people do this without a camera on them, and I do this most days without, or at least a lot of this most days without a camera on me. And the sense is to just imbue one's day with a structure of practice that can carry us through and that can bring us back to ourselves, or else our day can just become, another meaningless day that's awash in the timelessness of the cosmos. And instead, we take those days and we elevate them, and we gather them with us, and we make meaning out of them. It's quite powerful. We take this opportunity to acknowledge and repent any failures we may have had throughout our day, and also to see the beauty. Okay, so this is cool. There's a prayer which I'm going to pop up here on screen, which is a really awesome prayer that we do every day, which is really, really powerful. A really awesome way to go to sleep. Beauty that we brought into the world so that we can recommit with God's help to continue creating more of that beauty tomorrow. I don't know if you can see on my bedside table, it's Karen Armstrong, The Spiral Staircase. It's Karen Armstrong's spiritual autobiography. I recommend it. She's a brilliant writer, bordering on the poetic, if not explicitly poetic. Her and Elaine Pagel's Why Religion are like two kind of sister books that have both moved me in very deep ways. We wholeheartedly forgive anyone that may have wronged us throughout the day. So here it is on screen. I don't have the whole text here, as you can see, the 3 dots. I've skipped some of it, but it's a really powerful prayer. It's not just a prayer. It's like actually, it's a moment of actually forgiving. Prayer has kind of a soft sense to it. Here it's like saying, no, I hereby forgive Harini Meichel, and we enumerate all the ways which we may have been harmed in this life, in previous lifetime, physically, materially, financially, and we let go of those. What a powerful thing to let go of anything holding us, so that we can return our soul to God on a clean slate, and get it back on a clean slate. And in return to that, we ask God that we no longer come to sin, that we revert not to our old ways, that we do not anger God with our actions, and no longer commit evil in the eyes of God. Essentially saying that may we learn also to forgive ourselves, which is maybe the hardest person to forgive. And pray that no one be punished on our account. We cover our eyes and recite the Shema. Do you see what I did here? I had the camera up, POV, looking down at the prayer book, and when I said cover our eyes, I covered the lens, so it's like your eyes that are being covered to bring you into that immersive experience. Yeah, I hope that worked cinematographically. What even is that word? I hope it worked visually. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Yeah, so I set the camera back in my lap, pointed it back at me, covered my eyes again. A lot of acting for this. Remembering the unity of God that carries us throughout the day in every step we take. We conclude with a series of praise and psalms, ending with the beautiful words, Biyadcha afgid ruchi, padisa esi Adonai el emes. Into your hands I entrust my soul, O God. I trust that you will redeem me, for you are a God of truth. Some of the observant commenters on the videos noticed that the same verse from the book of Psalms was said by a certain Jew as he was being crucified. And according to one of the accounts of the Gospels, it was his last words, which are quite beautiful words, if I may say so myself. After having let go of all ills of the previous day, forgiven all that may have harmed us and need forgiveness, including ourselves, and relinquished our waking consciousness into the faithful hands of God, we say the final prayer of the day, in which we pray for a peaceful sleep and for a peaceful waking, for sweet dreams and pleasant thoughts. The prayer ends, "Blessed are you, God, whose glory illuminates the world." Following those final words, we endeavor to neither speak nor eat. We sleep mindfully with the express purpose of refreshing our bodies, hearts, and minds for another day of divine service, of kindness and presence. So I was laughing at myself here because I was trying to record these final lines, and I kept blundering them. And then I had this laugh here while I was editing, and I'm like, oh, it actually makes sense to laugh. Like, I can't be taking myself too seriously. It ends on this, like, piano coming down, music. We close our eyes and we have in mind to da-da-da. And I think we need to know how to laugh at ourselves in a spiritual life. So I kept that in. There's also a lot of stuff that I cut out here. There's a whole segment here after the saying of the Shema, which is this nighttime bedtime prayer called Tikkun Chatzot, which literally means fixing the midnight, which is like a very kind of select, elite, kind of mystical prayer. And I had a whole kind of rendition, translation discussion of it here. A friend of mine recommended that I not include it because it's not very mainstream in contemporary Judaism, and I concur and conceded to them. So I guess off to the final end of the video and to the disclaimers. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did and would like to support the work, I genuinely hope you did enjoy it. I put a lot of work into it, and I hope me going through the video now, you can get a sense a bit more of the work that went into it. Not a full description because this wasn't about the video making process and the editing, which took me forever. And my computer decided to crash on me 100 times and stop working with DaVinci, and I had to borrow my brother's laptop to finish the editing, and don't even ask. No, but I really hope people enjoyed it, and I think from the comments that people left, they really did, and both people that are Jewish and not Jewish found a lot of meaning in it, and that means a lot to me, so thank you. If you did and would like to support the work we're doing here, consider joining us at Patreon or with a one-time donation on PayPal. Yep. As my good friend Justin Sludge from Esoterica says, you don't get what you don't ask for, and I would like this project to continue, and therefore I'm going to ask people to support us financially, so there's no shame in that. You can also support us by sharing this video with a friend. That's important because not everyone has money to donate to projects. I certainly haven't had that kind of money to donate to other people. And working, the life of a creative and an artist is forces one to live very frugally. But there are other ways of supporting, and that's with a kind word, with appreciation, which goes a long way, and practically with helping to comment, to interact with the video, to share the video, to help spread the channel, the project. So I don't want anyone to feel that if they can't support us financially, that there are no other ways of supporting us. That's certainly far from the case, which is why I included that people can share the video. We are going to be diving into each one of those rituals at greater depth, so stay tuned for that. And as always, keep seeking. Okay, so here comes the disclaimers. I actually just want to read them because they're important, and I kind of shove them at the end of the video. I have this tendency of really wanting to make a lot of disclaimers, and I could have spent the first 3 minutes of the video making disclaimers, but the chances of anyone making it through them to the actual video is slim. So I pop them here at the end, but let me do them some justice now by actually reading them out. So firstly, that this was a highly truncated version of a Jewish day for the sake of brevity, and that we will, God willing, emphasis on God willing, release longer versions of which we will include more ritual explanations and translations. Check them out when they're released. I think we're still going to do that. I hope to. Maybe. I don't know at this point. Number 2, that this represented an ideal, not an actual day of mine. The day that I was raised on and strive towards, but I'm often far from, and that's true. It's an aspirational day for me, and I don't want anyone to assume from the video that I do all of this every day. It's things which I would like to be doing more of, and I really mean that. Number 3, that this articulation of a Jewish day was descriptive, not prescriptive. I'm not telling anyone what to do or how to do it or how to live their lives. I'm really just sharing with you what one version of a Jewish day might look like. I don't want anyone to feel like I'm ever here telling them how they should be, or it's not my gig. Number 4 is that we introduced a lot of practices here, and that for those of you who might like to adopt some of these practices, we recommend, the Royal We recommends that you take them slowly. It's very much not an all or nothing, and there's a lot, we can speak about that for a long time, on how sort of the directionality in one's Jewish and spiritual lives in general is much more important than where one is at any given moment. The question of where one is heading is what counts, and therefore to go at our own pace. People often rush into the journey and end up being burnt by the process, which is not helpful for anyone. And to savor the journey of cultivating the practices and learning them and struggling with them even. I'm dyslexic myself, so the Hebrew can be challenging for me. And to be able to appreciate the challenges and struggles that come with it. There's something beautiful in that. And to see what works for you. To see what works for you, by the way, is not just some sort of like light, soft platitude. Like according to Judaism, the purpose of the commandments is v'chai bohem, and this is the rabbis point out, is to live with them and not to die by them. So to see what works for you is actually an important part of the practice. Number 5, and this is important, these are all important disclaimers, that we represented here one specific flavor of Jewish practice. Judaism comes in many beautiful and legitimate different shapes and sizes, differing in culture and creed and language and location and in custom and in character, and that it's not my intention, God forbid, to flatten the rich diversity of Judaism into a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter picture, but rather to show you, the viewer, the particular flavor of Judaism that I was raised on and know most intimately, but by no means at all to imply that my way of practicing Judaism is in any way superior to any other form of Judaism. And how beautiful would it be if my other Jewish brothers and sisters that represent and know other flavors of Judaism intimately would do the same. And I actually had I also edited these disclaimers. I had a long list of like different flavors and versions of Judaism that I'd like to see represented. Everything from Taimani to Edom Mizrach to Ashkenazi and Litvish and blah blah blah, but I didn't keep the list here. Even the disclaimers were edited down. Number 6, this was a day of practice designed by Jews for Jews, as in, okay, I think that's self-explanatory. A fair few of them may have some universal applicability, some requiring greater or less degrees of cultural translation. I would, however, encourage one to mine first the riches of their own tradition before looking to adapt from another. And I really mean that I believe, as someone who's engaged in the comparative human study of mysticism, that every tradition contains at its core depths of equal profundity, and that we don't need to dig in the backyard of one another to find where the grass is greener, that we all have those treasures within our own backyard. And that's something which I've consistently tried to impress upon people in all of my years of teaching now, that they don't need to convert elsewhere to find something, that if one has a tradition of their own, which is not always the case, but if they do, they should dig into the depth of their own tradition and find the gold there. I had questions that were raised about like appropriation of Jewish practice and other things of that nature, and maybe I'll address it in an upcoming Q&A or something. Number 7, that the practices were presented here through the eyes of through the lens, actually, of a solitary Jewish man, and in some subtle and nuanced ways, and some less subtle and nuanced ways, they would be different for a married man, more different yet for a Jewish woman, and more different yet if practiced within community. All things which I strive for, God willing, when the time is right. Number 8, we demonstrated I am looking for community and for a Jewish wife. We demonstrated, number 8, a Jewish day as practiced these days outside of the land of Israel in the absence of a temple, monarchy, priesthood, and prophets, which is to say that Judaism contains 613 commandments, of which less than half are applicable today because of the absence of all these things mentioned here. Things looked quite different back then, and we hope and pray every day. We pray to God that our eyes may see the return to Zion in compassion and mercy. We pray that they will look quite different again in the near future. And the notion of waiting for the return of the exiles, the redemption, in a way that is done with peace, in a way that the house of God becomes a house of prayer for all people, and the temple becomes a place of universal love and tolerance and acceptance, is something which we pray for every single day. And it's on that note that I end the disclaimers and the video with a dedication to Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who playfully taught a generation how to love God, a Jewish mystic who has inspired me a lot in his own idiosyncratic way of approaching world spirituality, a project which I'm following in his footsteps in some humble ways. And a lot of the translations and imaginings and meanings derived from the rituals are words that I borrowed from his lexicon. Reb Zalman grew up, or came to at some point in his young life, to the Chabad Chassidic tradition that I was raised in, and found ways to articulate that in ways that were universal and perennial and pluralistic in their appeal and in their expression. So thanking Reb Zalman is really an understatement here. A lot of this is just plagiarized from Reb Zalman, but I think he would get a good kick out of that. He would have a good laugh. I never met him while he was alive, and but I hope to be carrying on his torch in ways that are meaningful to him. And thank you for joining me. I kind of recorded this on a whim. I thought there was a lot that was excluded in the original video, and I wanted a medium to thank some people, to go through the disclaimers and explain them, to touch on aspects of the ritual that I didn't get to touch on at greater length inside the video itself. Yeah, thanks for joining me, and I hope you're having a good day or evening wherever you are, and I hope that if you are inspired to find ways to explore traditions that have a ritual, that you do so in a way that is loving and both to yourself and others, and in a way that increases peace and love and light in this world. Yeah, because we have enough cynicism and criticism and deconstruction. We need some builders. We need some b'nai olam. Al tikru b'nayich ela b'nayich. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Amir Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Eliezer said in the name of Rabbi Chanina, Talmidi Chachamim Marbim Shalom Be'elam, the students of wisdom, Torah scholars, Shnemar V'chol B'nayich Limudi Adinei V'rav Shalom B'nayich. As the verse says, all your children are engaged in the study of God, and there is much peace amongst your children. Al tikri b'nayich ela b'nayich. Do not read your children, rather read the verse, your builders. All of your builders are engaged in the study of God, and there's much peace amongst your builders. As in, those engaged in the knowledge of God and the study of God are builders of the world. Shalom Rav Lahe V'Sarascha. There's great peace. Great peace, inner peace, external peace, to those that love your Torah, that love your wisdom. Ein lamei michshal. And there is no stumbling block to them. Yehi shalom b'chelech. Shalva b'amar nisayach. May there be peace in your portion, in your estate, and shalva and tranquility b'amar nisayach, in your dwelling places, in your palaces. Leman achai v'rei adabra nashalim bach. For the sake of my brothers, my siblings and friends, I speak to peace. I speak of peace to you. Leman beis Adonai Eloheinu. For the sake of the house of our Lord, Avaksha tov lach. I inquire, I implore goodness on your behalf. Adonai oiz le'amay yiten. May God give strength. God gives strength to his people. Adonai yivarech et amo b'shalom. May God bless his people with peace. Keep seeking.